But to what shall I compare this generation? It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their playmates. We piped to you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say, he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, behold, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Yet wisdom is justified by her deeds. Yea, Father, for such was my gracious will. All things have been delivered to me by my Father. And no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden light. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I invite you to be seated. "24 years ago, our fathers, our mothers, our ancestors, our family brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the idea that all people, all men are created equal. That was not the beginning of this country. That was a great moment of a great country, but it wasn't the beginning. More than 150 years before that, colonialists started to come here. And thousands, maybe millions of years before that, there were Native Americans in this great country, a great people doing great things. As those colonialists came here, they were guided by an idea. There were lots of things that brought them here, but for all of the colonies, religion, Christian faith played a key role in what they were doing. And for some, more than others, for some of them, coming to the New World was a chance for a fresh start, a chance to get swept up into the very life and vision of Jesus Christ, to aspire to see the world and live in a world the way God sees the world. John Winthrop is a great example of this. As he came to start the Massachusetts colony, he had this vision. He diligently insisted that the church was a place for people who spoke any language. He diligently insisted that the church was a place for Africans and for American Indians, that everyone was equal in the sight of God. And so as he came to the New World, he envisioned that this colony would be a city on a hill, a place that would live according to God's will in such a way that it might be a blessing to all of the others, a place where African immigrants who were already starting to come to the New World, many on their own accord, many coming through Europe, a place where European immigrants from places like England and Sweden and Germany and all over Europe were coming to the New World, a place where American Indians could all come together in diversity, and that diversity would create strength and unity. John Winthrop was a great pioneer trying to start a great land, but he wasn't perfect. A few years into the forming of that Massachusetts colony, John Winthrop signed the first colonial act which made slavery legal in the United States. Great people sometimes do terrible things. William Penn understood that in this new world there was a chance to do things to aspire to see things God's way. So William Penn, as he's founding Pennsylvania, he knew that at the core of that was religious freedom. To do things God's way meant that you couldn't insist on one person having the full authority of God. That makes people, human beings, into God. That you had to give people religious freedom. And that you could have competing ideas, people who were wrestling with trying to figure out what God's will was in this new place. And so Pennsylvania insisted on absolute religious freedom. It became a place where people of many different religions, not all Christian, were able to flock to for safety and freedom. William Penn was a remarkable man, but he was not perfect. His contemporaries looked at him as being in this ivory tower of intellectualism, unable to deal with or integrate the realities of sin into his life, unable to deal with the harsh realities that came with being in a place where life was hard. This is a great country formed by great people, and when they sought God's will, they were able to go farther and do better things. In 1776, English tyranny became untenable, intolerable. And so, Thomas Jefferson put to pen an idea that was central to many, if not most, of the colonialists at that time. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's God. It is God who creates us with freedom, for freedom, in God. Now, it's true that the Declaration of Independence was written by and in some ways for men. It is true that 41 of the 47 original official signers were at some point in their life slaveholders. But it is also true that amongst those signers of the Declaration of Independence who were strict, staunch abolitionists, fighting for freedom for all people, amongst people like George Clymer and John Adams, they saw this declaration, this concept of all humanity being created by God, as being the stepping stone that would abolish slavery forever. And so it was. Within 2 years, as the Constitution was being written, it can say that more than half of the people who had signed the Declaration of Independence, who had had slaves at some point, were now coming to a point where they were absolutely saying that slavery was wrong and denouncing it completely. When we see people the way God sees them, when we see people as created in the image of God, people of color, showing the kaleidoscope of God's diversity, people with many languages showing the great diversity of who God is and the tongues that God speaks, people with different songs and dances, different viewpoints and worldviews, showing the depth and the perplexity of who God is. When we see the world the way God does, we go a long way. It turns out that part of why in the writing of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence there were many people who were okay with slavery was because the slavery that they were used to was not the slavery that would become a hallmark of the American South. It turns out that amongst the signers of the Declaration of Independence were two former slaves. They were white, yes, but they were slaves nonetheless, who in desperation to find freedom, put themselves into temporary slavery. In order to find freedom from economic trouble, in order to find freedom from political trouble, they put themselves into slavery. And so when people thought about slavery, they weren't thinking of what would come to be the industrialized slavery that would be a hallmark of America. As the realities of this terrible slavery became more transparent, more and more people flocked to the abolitionist movement. Early Americans soon realized that liberty for anyone requires liberty for everyone. Equal rights for all, equal protection under the law for all, requires it really to be for all. It has taken a long time, and we still have ample work to do in this country. But this great country has provided liberty and opportunity in ways that were unthinkable in the world otherwise. This great country has formed a model for other countries as they have fought against tyranny and fought for freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of the press. And at the heart of that liberty is seeing the world the way God does. We are invited to lay down the burden of defining the world our ways. We are invited to lay down the burden of trying to fix the world our ways and taking up God's yoke and doing things God's way. Along the way, as we have tried to adhere to that principle, we have gotten lost. We have sometimes thought we were doing things God's ways, really only to be doing them our way. Systems which many hoped would bring justice were manipulated, and many used them as just a facade for justice. Jim Crow laws, dishonest treaties with Native Americans, internment for Japanese Americans, well-intended social programs which built dependence and a different kind of slavery. These were evil and wrong. Our country's past and present is checkered with injustice, cruelty, and deceit. But it is also a country whose past, present, and future is filled with self-sacrifice, courage, innovation, faith, hope, and a yearning to give liberty and justice to all. If we find ourselves in a place where we reject everything that a forefather or a foremother did because there was evil in their life, we are lost. If we reject the systems of government that have allowed us to embrace God's vision of the world, because amidst that government, amidst those systems, human beings did evil things, we are lost. If we wait until we only have leaders who are without sin, we are lost. We are sinners. And we, the church, the people of God, are called to be leaders, to help others see the world, to see humanity through the eyes of Jesus. This is a great country, but it is only great insofar as we embrace the freedom and liberty that God gives us. It is only great insofar as we see the world through God's eyes. As individuals, we have a choice. We can do things our way, or we can do things God's way. We like to think that we are smarter than God. We like to think that we can come up with the systems that are going to correct the injustices. We think that we can find a way to get retribution. And God says no. The way forward is not retribution, but grace and forgiveness. The way forward is not power, but humility. The way forward is listening humbly. But we are a broken people. As our country grew in the early 1900s, we came to a point where there was a sense that at the heart of this country we were different than other places. This was a place where social and economic status was not what defined you. This was a place where the accent you spoke with or the language you spoke did not define you, or the food you ate, or the type of church you went to, or the fact that you didn't go to church didn't define you. This was a place where, because of liberty and opportunity, all were welcome. And so, inspired by the Statue of Liberty, there was a poem that swept across the country and then eventually was inscribed on the base. And in part, that poem, The New Colossus, reads, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek frame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. No, keep ancient lands your storied pomp," cries she with silent lips. "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free." We cannot count on any government, on any leaders, to give us freedom. Freedom has one source. We cannot count on ourselves to give us freedom. Freedom has but one source. Our freedom ultimately comes from God, and we experience that freedom when we listen to Jesus. "Come to me, all who labor and rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." It doesn't matter where you are in your journey of faith. It doesn't matter where you've been. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter what you sound like. God has freedom for you. And God wants you to have that freedom so greatly that God says you are worth dying for. And God died on a cross that you might have ultimate freedom today, tomorrow, and for all eternity. Amen.